Welcome, everybody, to another episode of I Would Say Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, also the man in charge over at CF After Dark. Um, we're going to keep this fairly short tonight, just because I would say both men and women play in about an hour. So we're going to try to make sure we get wrapped up in plenty of time so that everyone can move over to um, their game. So I wanted to present this idea today, because earlier this week, or I guess this past weekend, I should say, Brett Yormark made the comment during one of the basketball games. I can't remember which one. Basically, teasing that the Big 12 was getting ready to announce a big. They had a big announcement. It was supposed to come today. Now it's coming tomorrow. And didn't really hint at exactly what it was, but essentially said it's going to be revolutionary for the sport. Nobody's ever done it. All this. And after having some time to kind of think about it a little bit, kind of just talk to some people about it and kind of float some ideas. I'm not sure exactly what it'll be for basketball. It could be a format change to the conference tournament, or it could be they could be adding a revenue sharing component to the Big 12 tournament, something like that. Could be a few different things that way. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. I don't really have any inside scoop on what that is. I'm curious to see what it's going to be tomorrow. But one thing I think would be interesting that I think you could do. I think you could pull this off for Big 12 football. Because Yormark's philosophy since taking over the Big 12 has always been trying to be one step ahead of the curve. He's trying to be they're trying to be they're trying to evolve before they need to evolve type of thing. They're trying to stand out from the crowd a little bit, do things a little bit differently, and establish itself as that Big 12 isn't messing around, because they're going to go out and try to do things a little bit different. They're going to zig when everyone else zags type of thing. And I respect that. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you come up with some kooky stuff and it doesn't quite stick. You throw some stuff against the wall to see what happens. We've heard from a number of people about, or we've heard a number of times about playing games overseas, playing basketball games in Mexico City, things like that. Just and I maybe those are coming, but I kind of do think at least part of it getting floated by Yormark is just to kind of see what the people think. And I respect the hell out of that, because he's trying to do a job that the Big 12 has a different problem than everybody else, because they've got all these new members, and you're trying to solidify yourself as the third conference in college football. Like, you're just not going to be able to pass the Big Ten and the SEC. You're just not going to be able to. Just from a number of different perspectives, not necessarily just on the field, but I'm just talking in terms of revenue, prestige, all that stuff. You're not gonna be able to pass the Big Ten and the SEC. But you can clearly establish yourself as the third best conference ahead of the ACC, which has plenty of its own problems, including two of its biggest members trying to leave in Florida State and Clemson. So we'll see kind of how that thing pans out. But I've got a couple ideas, and specifically one big idea I think for the Big 12 that I think could be really interesting for football to help kind of set it apart a little bit. Trax wants to know, what is our panic level about the little release of Rodgers' contract? He still isn't finalized 60 days in. Not like a 0.1, I would say. If this was going to be an issue, like if anything was going to be an issue, Jimmy Rodgers wouldn't have spent the last 2 months putting together a transfer class and a recruiting class. They have a legally binding verbal agreement to start these things out. And then it's months of, of the university and the lawyers basically hashing out every single little revision and detail that they can find. And sometimes it's as silly as like a clause that says, we will, that Jimmy Rodgers will be paid X dollars per week, and over the course of this many weeks or whatever it is, and the lawyers want to stipulate, it says it will be direct deposited every week or something like that. Like, it's little stuff like that. And anybody that's ever dealt with any sort of lawyer, any sort of attorney in any situation, knows that like that kind of stuff just takes forever. Just it takes days to make these little tiny revisions, and they go read it again, they find another revision, and they go read it again, they find another revision. So no, the answer is no. I'm not really worried about. I'm not worried at all about the contract situation just because they haven't got anything signed yet. It's, you know, those things can take months. But when you're talking about that kind of money and you're talking about like just the current landscape of college athletics, um, it's just yeah, I'm not concerned about it. I believe if I remember correctly, Matt Campbell and TJ Otzelberger both took a while to get contracts signed. So I don't know if that's a if it's just normal for Iowa State or if it's normal for Jamie Pollard or if it's just normal across the sport. I'm not sure, I guess, but um, there is a track record of this happening at Iowa State at least. So I'm not personally concerned about it as of right now. But going forward, I think there's a couple things that the Big 12 needs to do to gain some sort of national exposure or like just I hate to use the word respect because it kind of to a certain degree it can sound just like saying like we get no respect. That's kind of it kind of gives some like little man syndrome vibes. But it it sort of is respect in that it's like they needed or like in order to gain a greater benefit of the doubt maybe is the right way is the better way to describe it, where it's saying like, oh, if in the case of the Big 12 versus another conference in this situation, it's always not the Big 12 because the Big 12 is this, and this. And it is to a certain extent some respect, but it's also just being uh you know given some benefit of the doubt when you're comparing teams and things like that, where it's like the Big 12 champion and the Big 10 fourth place team or something like that, where it's like, well, the Big 10 is just so far ahead that the fourth place team is just automatically better than the Big 12 champion, stuff like that. Um, but I think one thing that I would that the Big 12 can do, there's a couple things that the Big 12 can do to help set it apart. Um, One of the things I would like to see them do, and I think that you could do, is find more ways to include revenue sharing opportunities for the athletes. We've already seen this past year, Iowa State played in the tournament in Vegas, where the players all got a cut of the winnings and all that. And Iowa State kind of got screwed out of it because the players essentially lost out on money because of some weird tiebreaker scenarios for that tournament, even though they had a record to play in the championship game. But whether that's in exhibition games, it's a non-con games, whatever it is, the Big 12 should try to find more revenue sharing opportunities for players. Basketball, it's a little bit easier because they have these preseason tournaments and all that, and football just doesn't have those. But I think it would be very fun is if in the spring you have spring practice and a spring scrimmage, and then um, the conference organizes a spring game between two different schools, puts it on TV, and makes it kind of an official exhibition game. Puts it on TV, lets it be a revenue sharing opportunity for the players, and it gets some exposure to these teams, to other teams in the spring. And obviously, you treat it like a spring game. Maybe you have different rules. You have no contact rules, things like that. But I like in the spring have Iowa State, have Iowa State play, I don't know, pick one, Colorado, TCU, Oklahoma State, whatever, and everybody gets a spring game matchup. I realize that's more, it's an extra travel thing, but it's one game, it's a practice, something like that. Maybe you have everybody fly down to Jerry World, and you play spring game. You play 3 spring games a day for a weekend or something like that, or 4 spring games a day, for a weekend, or 2 on Friday night, 3 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, that type of thing. and just play, 10-minute quarters or just two 15-minute halves, whatever it is. Get them on the field, let them play a spring game against each other. You can get it on TV. You can get more revenue sharing opportunity for this. I think that'll be a really interesting way because then you can put actual Big 12 football on the field and on TV in the spring, which I think is really interesting. The other component of this, and I think the big thing that I would like to see, if I like the way you can make this really fun, is I would like to see the Big 12. I would like to see them replace the 12th game in the season with a conference championship game semifinal or slash a curated final game. So the last game of the season remains like the opponent and location are to be determined at the beginning of the season. And as we get closer, we kind of get this figured out a little bit. But then once you get to say the week after Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving weekend, whatever it is, do the weekend before Thanksgiving, it doesn't matter. You are going to seed everybody 1 through 16. The top 4 seeds are going to play their 12th game this is the 12th game of the regular season. This is still a regular season game. The 12th game of the regular season is seeded. So like this past season, it went Texas Tech, BYU, Utah, Houston. And so Texas Tech would have been the 1 seed, Houston the 4 seed, BYU the 2, Utah the 3. And then they play an on-campus conference championship game semifinal. And then the winners go to Arlington to play in the conference championship game. Anybody that's not in that playoff is going to play a game against the team seated immediately next to it. So in this case, Arizona would have played Arizona State. Cincinnati plays TCU. Iowa State plays Kansas State. Baylor plays Kansas. UCF plays West Virginia. Colorado plays Oklahoma State. What you're doing there is getting competitive matchups. You're getting matchups that should produce good, close, competitive games. And you can, look at that standings though. You've got the Holy War in a conference championship game semifinal. You've got Arizona State, so you've got a rivalry there. You've got Farmageddon that last week. Could be a rematch of Farmageddon depending on when you played that game. Which last year it would have been they played in Dublin, then they would have played again in the semifinal, which I think is kind of fun. Baylor and Kansas, UCF, West Virginia, Colorado, Oklahoma State. You get some competitive matchups there where Colorado and Oklahoma State aren't getting blown out by whoever at the end of the season. They can play a game that they have a shot at winning, and then Arizona and Arizona State, who just missed out on the top 4 and on the conference championship game semifinal, get to play. So they all have a chance to get to add another quality win to their resume against a team that's about as good as they are, which I think would have been really, really fun. It gets you a playoff situation in the regular season that draws eyeballs because it's like, okay, the winner of these games goes to the conference title game. The rest of these are competitive matchups that are worth watching. Is Colorado, Oklahoma State the sexiest matchup? Probably not, but is Colorado and TCU any sexier? Is Oklahoma State and Arizona any sexier? Not really. It was still top of the conference, or upper half than the worst team in the conference. They're not any worse, but at least, that gives Oklahoma State a chance to, it gives them a chance to play a team that they are at least in the same realm of. UCF, West Virginia would have been a competitive game. Kansas and Baylor. I just really think this gives you a great opportunity to get lots of extra eyes on you at the end of the season. And so far, the tiebreakers have produced some interesting results. 2024, we had that crazy tiebreaker coming at the end. Obviously, Iowa State obviously came out at the end of it, and it was kind of a fun 12th hour thing, but it was based on about 9 different things. It's not just head to head, but it's like if it's a 3-way tie, then it's a round robin thing. And then there's a million other layers to this thing. And you're going to have some of those. Your tiebreakers are still going to be involved there to find playoff seeding or, to find, conference playoff seeding. But It's not going to be quite as big a deal where you're like trying to find two teams. If you have four teams there, you don't have to add a game to the regular season. You don't have to do anything, but all you're doing is curating good matchups right there in the last week of the season, right when it matters the most. So I think that's really, really interesting. I think that'd be a fun way to do this. It's a reason for people to, for people around the country to tune in because then they can see a playoff happening in real time, basically. And you could find a way if you wanted to play that 12th week and play if you wanted to put those two semifinal games at Jerry World, you could, I guess. Um, and play them as a neutral site semifinal if you want, you could, I suppose. And then do that as a revenue sharing option for the players. But on campus is fine too. I really like that idea. It's something that has not even come close to being like proposed on a large scale to anything. And I don't I mean we're talking about the SEC is still trying to, I don't know if the SEC is moving up to a ninth game anytime soon or not. Um, if you're already going to play, if you're already going to play an extra conference game, make it against a team that you're roughly competitive with, and give more teams a shot to make it in. You know, I I think that's really fun. I really really like that idea. If you go back to 2024, if you go back to 2024, that makes us even more interesting because um, let's see here. Yeah, because 2024 would have been Iowa State, Colorado, BYU, and Iowa State in that semifinal. All of those were tied at 7-2. So you had all the teams tied for first place, then moving, instead of that, the last time, the kind of that crazy last week, all four of those just go straight to a semifinal. And Arizona State would be playing Colorado, I think. I'd have to remember what the exact situation going into the final week was, but I think it would be Arizona State playing Colorado, Iowa State playing BYU, and the winners of those games goes into the conference championship game. I think that'd been really fun. Um, Arizona State probably still beats Colorado there, but Iowa State and BYU hadn't played that year. They didn't play it all in 2024. So you get some fun things going on there. Then, outside of that, you've got a TCU Baylor matchup. You've got Texas Tech and Kansas State, West Virginia and Kansas. Yeah, you've got some fun games in there. And somehow near the bottom, you've got you have a Utah Arizona game farther down there, which obviously 2024, neither team was that good, but kind of an interesting matchup considering where they ended up getting to. But I really like this as an option here. It's something different. It's not something quirky or gimmicky in that it delegitimizes anything. It doesn't delegitimize the regular season, doesn't delegitimize the conference in any way, but it basically just creates better matchups in the last week. So you don't have a situation where you're going into the last week of the season, you got two teams on a tiebreaker, and you know basically, if one of them wins, the other one gets in. If one of them wins, they get in. If the other one wins, they get in, type of thing. But one team plays Oklahoma State, and the other one plays, and the other one plays Houston or something like that, where one team's playing a bad team, one team's playing a good team, and it's literally just how it's just the balance of the schedules that's going to be a huge determining factor in which one gets in. But if you get to that point of the season where they're basically tied, put them in a semifinal. They've both clearly earned the right to be there. Put them in a semifinal and let them play each other, or let them play their way into the conference championship game, rather than relying on some silly set of tiebreakers to figure out which two of four tied teams are going to go into the title game. I mean, that in itself is kind of nonsense. So let's just do it as a playoff. If you want to do it as a neutral site game, do it that way. Play at Jerry World, or you know, play it at the Alamo Dome, or play it in Vegas, or play it wherever you want. Play it at Arrowhead, you know, and you can turn it into a revenue sharing opportunity for the players. I think it'd be a lot of fun. And that's how you can set the Big 12 apart doing it that way. And I think it's a really fun idea. Um, you know, I there'll be a lot of other future ways to do this. I don't think that just like blindly, slapping games in Mexico City or Tokyo or Toronto or wherever, Germany or what, I don't think that just randomly slapping games in other countries is necessarily the right move. The Iowa State Kansas thing in Ireland, Kansas State thing in Ireland was a little unique because that's a rivalry game and it was part of a neutral site game that already exists. So it's not like they took a game and just put it in a different country just cuz. I mean, it was part of a thing. And, where the, you know, where the opening kickoff game in Ireland, where they reached out to them. They reached out to Iowa State about trying to make this happen, and Kansas State just happened to work out. And they put a conference game there. But if you're doing it like in Germany or something like that, you're having to make a new game, you're having to make a new event, and just be like, oh, we're gonna just slap this thing at Allianz Arena in Munich, and we're just gonna figure it out and hope people show up, type of thing. Which there's certain schools that would absolutely send the fan base over, and there's some that absolutely wouldn't. Like I would not send a, I probably would not send a Baylor Cincinnati game to Munich. Probably wouldn't do that. I don't think you'd get a lot of traveling fans to that. Could you pull off a BYU Utah game in Toronto, Canada? Maybe, but it's kind of weird. I don't think that the neutral site games are a viable publicity thing going forward. I mean, they're interesting, I guess, but I mean, as we saw this year for Iowa State and Kansas State, traveling internationally, playing internationally, and then coming back and playing again right away the next week can cause a lot of problems. It can cause a significant amount of problems to the rest of your season. So teams just won't be that excited about. They won't be very excited about going and doing those things. They're not going to want to go to Munich for a week 2 game or something like that and play a conference game over there and have to come back and then play somebody else in non-con. They're not going to want to do that. So you find other ways that don't just involve random dumb neutral site games that nobody likes anyways. Another thing I think I'm not exactly sure how you implement this, but I would like to see the Big 12 find a structure to incentivize teams to find interesting non-con opponents, to find quality non-con opponents. That doesn't mean that Iowa State has to give up Iowa. I mean, because Iowa is typically a quality Power 5 non-conference opponent. But we don't need to see Texas Tech blasting Abilene Christian and Houston Baptist for 3 games in the non-con and then showing up to the Big 12 conference. If you're going to play, I mean, if you win your conference, you win your, go undefeated in the Big 12 and all that, great. I mean, you've earned your right in there, but I don't know if you can work it into a tiebreaker, or if you literally reward some sort of revenue sharing prize to the players for beating Power 5 non-conference teams, but then you can reward scheduling and winning these non-conference games against other conferences. And which a lot of times national experts will use, like, what's the Big 12's record against other Power 5 conferences? And they'll use that to compare how that went. It's actually funny because last year, I believe the Big 12 was the only conference that ended up with a winning record against other Power 5 conferences. So that was kind of interesting. But, I think they should try to find a way to incentivize that and try to get it so that way everybody's picking up at least one Power 5 non-conference opponent, because some of them just don't do it. So I would like them to try to figure out a way to make that happen. Unfortunately, there's not a lot else football wise going on right now. Everything's pretty much chilled out. There's really not any recruiting news. There's nothing else really going on in the football front right now. We've got a little while now where it's pretty much just basketball. Men got TCU tonight on the road. This is kind of their last, I don't know if I want to say like easy game, if you want to call it, because they're on the road and they're only like a 6.5 point favorite. This is not an easy game. TCU is a very solid team that they've got some really good wins. They've got some bad losses. They lost to New Orleans, I think it was. Um, but they've also got a win over Florida. So they're kind of a weird team that's just all over the place. But this is the last one before they get into a really, really tough stretch where you got Kansas on Saturday, then you turn around and get Houston on Monday, and you take a road trip out to BYU and Utah. You come home, you get Texas Tech, you get Arizona. It's a tough, tough stretch here. Um, a lot of bracketology has Iowa State as a 2 seed, maybe flirting with a 1 seed, depending on what kind of wins they can pick up coming up. Um, but they've got an opportunity to pick up a lot of big, big wins here. If you can protect home floor, and pick up a couple of wins where maybe your only loss on the road on in the stretch is at Arizona, or maybe at Arizona and at BYU. Depending on how everything else goes, you've got a shot at a 1 seed. If you go 5-2 over the next 7, or call it 6-2 over the next 8, including the senior night against Arizona State, who is really, really, really bad. If you can go 6-2 to finish the season, you might just be a 1 seed, depending on if anybody, if UConn or Duke or somebody loses, you've got a shot at a 1 seed there. But even if you can go 5-3, yeah, you maybe lose to Arizona, BYU, and then you drop the Houston game or something like that, or you drop either Houston or Kansas. You're probably a safe 2 seed at that point, and you're trying to see what you can do in the conference tournament, but it's probably not really affecting your seed a whole lot. But they got to win tonight, down in Fort Worth, 6.5 point favorite, I think is what they were right now. They just got to go then take care of business, basically keep the ball moving, try to avoid too many live ball turnovers, and they can get back and they can get out of there with a win and get back to Hilton Coliseum for their date with Kansas on Saturday for the rematch there. The women tonight are on the road on the road in Provo, Utah against BYU. Now the women have won 5 in a row now. They dropped 5 in a row, and then they have now won 5 in a row, and now they're back in the conversation. Now they're back safely in the tournament. Back on pace to get into the top. If they can pick up some good wins here down the stretch, they could potentially play their way into a top 4 seed, and which will allow them to play a couple tournament games in Hilton Coliseum, which would be huge, huge, huge for them. So big opportunity for them to keep stacking up the wins. Iowa State needs to keep stacking up the wins. Obviously they had a little bit of a sleepy game against Baylor last Saturday after having pretty much the entire week off. Baylor played well, played well enough. Cameron Carr had a really nice game, but I would say looked a little sleepy, and I think that was mainly because of their, like I said, almost an entire week off. I would expect them to be sharper tonight. You'd hope they would be, because TCU is absolutely good enough to beat them at home. So they just need to keep their shit together, keep passing the ball, avoid turnovers, make free throws, and they should be able to walk out of there with a win. So, like I said, a little bit shorter show tonight just because there's not a lot going on. There's nothing going on for football. And we will keep moving on. If anybody's got any questions, they can throw them in the chat right now. I'm happy to answer them, maybe be on here another 10, 15 minutes. In the meantime, no, if I had talked about it a little bit on the nightcap last night for CF After Dark, and talked about it a little bit elsewise. Oh, let's see. We got a question. Who do you think will be the underrated gets for ISU next season? I'm assuming you mean like this transfer class, this recruiting class, and who's going to be kind of underrated, like a sneaky player going into next season. I'm assuming that's what you mean. Because if you're talking about like the 27 recruiting class, I am not up on that yet, so I'm not sure about that. But as far as kind of sneaky guys in this one, if you want to call him sneaky, I think Cameron Petaway at running back, the transfer from Bowling Green, I think is a really fun player. I don't know if he's the starter, because that could be Aiden Flora, that could be Bryson Williams. They have a couple guys in there. I don't think River Peppers will be healthy enough in time to be able to be in the rotation on day one. But I think Cameron Petway is a really interesting player. You can get him on special teams. He's gosh, lightning fast. He is so fast, man. I mean, I know Aiden Flores is a really good returner. Uh, you got to figure out a way to balance those two because I think you put Cameron Petaway on kick returns and let Aiden Flores return punts. I I I think that's how I would handle that. Do I think Carson Willich will start? That is a very, very interesting question. Um, because obviously, if you're going to a 4-2-5, you're only playing two linebackers in that situation, and obviously they've got some guys that they really like. Sullivan Schlimgen, uh, and X line. They've got some players at that linebacker spot. That's one of their stronger. I would argue that's one of their stronger positions going into next season. Um, but Carson Wilch has played a bunch of snaps and he was really good last year. When he was healthy, he's been really good. And it's tough. I because Bo Goodwin's there too. Mm, that's a tough question because it'll all depend. It'll all depend on how quickly Carson Willich can adapt to the system. Like Tristan Exline, he's coming from D2, so he's probably got to put a little bit of weight on, but he's coming out of the same system, and he's a really good player. And Sullivan Schlimgen's coming out, he's coming through from their same system, so he doesn't have as much to pick up on. And he's probably helping other people get up to speed. So like maybe you start him right away if he's picking up the scheme right away. I think that's tough. I think he's one of the first four. I think he's in the two deep for the two linebacker spots. I don't know if he's the starter or not. I think that will depend. Like I think if I had to guess, I think Tristan Exline is probably like the guy. Like that's the guy you're looking at. Is like he's the number one starter. I think maybe I don't know. Maybe Schlimgen. I think Exline and Schlimgen are going to be your 1 and 2, and then Carson Willich will be in the two deep rotation right away. Um, yeah, I don't. Yeah, Austin he says he fits. Just don't know. I think Schlimgen's a good athlete. And Exline, yeah, that's so. The thing, the reason you would start Willich over Schlimgen is because Willich is a redshirt senior. He's played a ton of football. I mean, he's been hurt a number of times, but he's also just played a ton of football. And Tristan Exline is also an experienced guy. He's played a ton of football. Not here, but he's played a ton of football. And I think Tristan Exline, you put him out there right away. He's probably defensive newcomer of the year type material. He's that good. So maybe early on it's Exline and Willick, and then they kind of figure it out from there. And maybe Schlimgen slides in. It's tough to say. I do think Willick will be in the two deep for linebackers, but I don't. It's hard to say right now how good he will be in the 4-2-5 only because it's just a new system that he's got to pick up. I think he's got the athleticism to play in it. Like I think he's quick enough to be able to play in a 4-2-5, and that's why they kept him. That's why he stayed. But I'm just, It says only backer I'm missing is Cooper Ebel. Yeah, I wish Cooper Ebel could have stuck around, but I think you could make the case that he maybe isn't laterally quick enough for a 4-2-5. Even if like a bunch of those linebackers had stayed, I think a lot of them would have had to slim down. A little, which I mean you can do that. Kilbert Zenite, I'm not sure how he would have panned out in a 4-2-5. Cooper Ebel, maybe. The guys that stuck around, I think, are going to be good fits, and I think they brought in good guys. I think they brought in some nice players at linebacker. Where I'm not particularly worried there. Are you crazy for saying you're not going to miss Bacon? No, you're not. Caleb Bacon was awesome. He's a great pass rusher. In a 4-2-5, he is not a linebacker. He is probably he's probably he's probably an edge rusher and in a 4-2-5. He's a defensive end. You'd put an extra 15, 20 pounds on him and you put a hand in the dirt and you let him rush the passer. That said, that's not his expertise is is pass rushing with a hand in the dirt. So I don't know that Caleb Bacon is an awesome fit in a 4-2-5. His pass coverage skills are okay, lackluster at times. You know, I don't know that the thing is you got to remember that linebackers in a 3-3-5 are they have to be built differently and they have a different set of skills than a 4-2-5. It's a completely different defense as far as what you're asking your linebackers to do. Because in a 3-3-5, in the end, you're filling gaps, but it's how you're filling gaps is the difference. And I'm right now I'm going over to PFF to see if I can find. I was curious what Caleb Bacon's pass rushing or pass coverage grades were last year. Um, but I yeah, so in a 3-3-5, your linebackers really need to be the linebackers really need to be a little bit bigger. They need to be a little bit stouter. They need to be better downhill. And they're basically they're plugging gaps essentially. And they're basically just plugging gaps. And they're filtering runs to the outside. So that way safeties can come down and attack the running game from the perimeter. And that's why you saw some at times teams that were good at running to the perimeter, that were good at getting an extra blocker to the outside, had success against Iowa State because they would end up having an extra blocker to catch that safety that's coming down. And you would basically, you'd have a tackle and then the running back could be coming around and you'd have a safety coming in down here, but then they would bring a pulling guard or something like that around to the outside here, catch that safety, and then the running back could come right through here, right off the tackle's hip, and just cut right upfield, basically kind of where the slot would be. And should have logged into this ahead of time. But you get to the 4-2-5, and you have 4 defensive linemen on the field there. And that's your run defense. You're still fitting gaps with the linebackers, but when you're running a 4 down, it's really less about, just plugging gaps and fitting stuff to the outside. It's you have 2 linebackers kind of sitting back and they're reading the running back, they're reading the quarterback, and they're reading where the offensive line is moving, so that way they can plug specific gaps in the line. You're not just like, 3 guys and then your linebackers are just scooching up and filling, the A and B gap on each side and just calling that day. You're just making a wall and then moving the stuff to the outside. You have your wall with the 4 linemen there, and then you have linebackers shooting gaps to take down the running back. And then, basically one is going to be in charge of fitting the interior gap, and one's going to be catching the outside stuff. You have a safety, you have a nickel corner or a safety that's going to be floating around that can help on that side too. So, they attack the run differently, and when you have that too in pass coverage, the linebackers in a 4-2-5 are asked to play pass coverage a little bit differently as well, where they're going to be asked to drop into deep coverage once in a while, and they need to be able to have good lateral quickness to the sides of the field. So they need to be quick, and they need to have good straight line speed. And that is going to be an important deal. And Iowa State's 3-3-5, your straight line and your lateral speed was a little bit less important than it was your intelligence and your ability to get downhill and make plays at the line of scrimmage and make plays in between gaps in the running games. So you're kind of fitting stuff. You're fitting stuff a little bit differently, and you're chasing down outside runs differently with your running backs and your or with your linebackers in each system. So they basically, In a 3-3-5, ideally all your linebackers are like 240, 245, and they got okay, they've got decent like downhill speed. They're not going to be as fast to the sideline because you just don't you're not you have your safeties covering to the sideline. In a 4-2-5, your linebackers need to be more laterally quick because you've got the verticals largely covered with your defensive line. So your linebackers need to be able to get to the side, and their safeties are coming downhill to help out in the running game there. So they cover things differently, and that's why like, I don't know if I would have loved seeing Caleb Bacon in a 4-2-5. He was good at coming downhill. He was sturdy in the running game, but he was not. Um, he wasn't great at dropping back into coverage. Okay, finally got to his PFF grades. So last year, I mean, he graded out as a 72 overall defender, which is a solid defender. 76 in run grade, run defense grade, 71 in pass rush grade, 60 in pass coverage grade. Very much average, maybe slightly above average, but very pretty much an average linebacker in coverage. Just was not his specialty. He played at 6'4", 240, which is too big for a 4-2-5 linebacker. 4-2-5 is all about speed. Behind the defensive line, it's all about speed. And really, you're running two run stoppers at defensive tackle and nose tackle. So you want to have two Ray Limas on your defensive line in the interior. You want two Ray Limas or Jamal Johnson. Pick your run stopping defensive tackle in the middle there. And you want quicker edge rushers. You're not really as worried about the run setting. You're not worried about the edge setters like if you remember Jake McDonough, not Jake McDonough. What am I thinking of? Corey Morrissey. Let me see. I'm trying to think. A couple of the earlier Campbell guys too. Gosh, I can't remember. But they've had a ton of them at Iowa State. Where basically just they're essentially edge setters. They're not really pass rushers necessarily. They're not gonna swim around a guy and get to the quarterback. They're more of just a run stopping defensive end. The other one, gosh, why can I not think of his damn name? He's on the freaking the Peterson brothers are perfect examples. Zach and Joey Peterson, perfect examples of run stopping DNs. They're not really great at pass rushing. They're not going to beat their guy one-on-one a ton. But they'll set an edge and they'll force a running back to make a decision as far as bouncing it out, getting it into an A gap or a B gap, and then letting a safety or a linebacker come down. They were good at setting an edge, not as good at getting to the pass at getting to the passer. So, I think for that reason, but I mean, Cooper Ebel only registered a 61.7 in coverage too. And he's actually kind of very average last year. Interestingly enough, I'm just kind of blown away by this, but Caleb Brazina registered an 82.8 in coverage, which is very interesting because I thought he was okay in coverage at best. But he was fine in coverage, I guess, but then like his run defense wasn't great. So it's interesting that Caleb Brazina graded out as an 82.8 as a coverage linebacker, which was good for 36th in the country last year, which is interesting. But I think I think if you to circle back to the original question, I think it's going to be X-Line and Schlimgen or X-Line and Willick right away, but all three of those will be in the two deep at either linebacker spot. Who do you think will start on the defensive line next year? Well, I think Bobby Terrell is a very obvious one. I would say, Bobby Terrell. I think I think you can look at the Iowa State guys for the edge rushers. I think you can look at a Jace Gilbert. You can look at a Trey Verdon. I think both of them are potential candidates there. Jared Ramos, I don't know if he's there just yet. Let's see, I'm pulling up Iowa State's roster, making sure I'm just not missing people. Yeah, Bobby Terrell, Malachi Tease is interesting. Caden Crawford, I think all those guys are really interesting. I like the idea of Jace Gilbert and Trey Verdon starting on the edge next year. I think that would be, um, I think that'd be fun. One, to have some of the old Campbell guys back, but then two, I just think I think they make sense out there, especially because if you can get Bobby Terrell on the inside, he can anchor the interior of that defensive line, and I think you're going to be, I think you'll be in good shape there. Caden Crawford's a really interesting one. He's coming out of South Dakota. His PFF grades last year were awesome. They were like in the 90s last year. He graded out really, really well. He had 6 tackles in a TFL against us last year. Um, and he was originally at Iowa for a few years too. So it'd be kind of fun having him back, and him going back to Kinnick and all that. Kind of having a little bit of a chip on his shoulder for that. So all right, 7:46. So we're gonna hop off for the evening, and give you guys a chance to kind of go grab beer, whatever else, for the basketball game starts. So appreciate everybody for tuning in. Um, you know, this week and every week, I really appreciate the discussion, appreciate the comments and the questions and all that. I love having these kinds of discussions, especially in the off season where there's just not a lot going on. Um, really appreciate you guys. Excuse me, tuning in for this. So we will see you guys again. I'm maybe next week. I might end up taking next week off, because I might have some other stuff going on. But we will be back here, if not next week, then the week after that as well. So thank you for tuning in. We will see you guys again next Tuesday or the Tuesday after that. So this has been Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm Levi Stevenson with CF After Dark. Tonight, make sure after the basketball game, make sure you check out our post game, because so after the basketball game, they're going to do a men's post game and they're going to do a women's post game, and then we'll do the CF After Dark post game after that. So it'll be starting a little bit later than usual. It'll be probably like, if the game's over at 10 or a little after, we'll probably be starting at like 10:35 or 10:40 instead of 10:20. So keep an eye out for that. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Dukester and Redbird and everybody else, Tracks and everybody else I saw in here. So, and Chris Schubert, all that. So appreciate you guys, and see you guys again next time. Thanks.